Hello, everyone, and welcome to Nature Live Online from the Natural History Museum. My name is Cristina, and I'm going to be your host for today's show. Now, if you've been following Nature Live Online, thank you and welcome back. And if you're new to Nature Live Online, let me tell you a little bit about it. In these shows, we get the opportunity to bring the Natural History Museum in London to your home, not only the museum, but also its collections and stories and the specimens in it by the hands of our guest scientists, who will also be answering my questions, but we are streaming live, so they'll be able to answer your questions as well. So yeah, remember we are live, and if you have any questions for our guests today, please put them in the chat, and I'll try to get through as many as possible. Now, also, if you're enjoying Nature Live Online, or if you enjoyed the show today, consider making a donation to support the museum. Big or small, we always appreciate it. And you can do it by clicking the button that is by the chat on YouTube if you're watching from there, or you can go directly to our website, and we'll put a link in the chat so you can click in there. But without any further ado, let's start talking about vaginas in the natural world. We'll be talking about vaginas, sexual organs, arms race, and also biology. And for that, we have a really, really special guest today that I'm really looking forward to chat with, Dr. Natalie Cooper, a scientist from the Natural History Museum. Hi, Natalie.
Hi, how you doing?
Really, really well, really happy, really excited, and really happy to have you here. Hope you're well too.
Yeah, good.
Brilliant. Now, Natalie, as I said before, we're going to be talking about vaginas in the natural world. But before that, can you tell our audience first what you do at the museum and why we're chatting about this today?
Sure. So I'm a senior researcher in the vertebrates division. So I work on mammals, birds, amphibians, reptiles, and fishes. And yeah, I love vaginas.
Brilliant, me too, and I love chatting with you about them. So yeah, as I said before, we're going to be talking about vaginas, but going a little bit further and talking as well about the research. But before we start on that, let's establish what are vaginas. What do we mean when we say vagina? And a very important question is, do all animals have them?
Okay, so there's a couple of different ways that you could define them, but the definition that we're going to go for today is that it's a connection between the reproductive organs that are inside an animal and then the outside. So some kind of channel that links those two. And importantly, it's a channel that's just for the reproductive purposes, so just for sperm going in and babies coming out. It's not used for other things. So in some animals, they might have one channel for those things, and they call that a cloaca. So that's when you get reproductive purposes, but also feces and urine and things like that coming out of the same channel. So if it's a channel that's only for that, we call it a vagina. And this can be found, therefore, because of this very broad definition, this applies to lots and lots of different animals. So we find it in mammals, but not all mammals, importantly. So obviously humans have them. All of these examples here have them, lots of other kinds of mammals, but some mammals don't. Some mammals will have a cloaca. Same way we see it in some birds, but not in all birds. Also in things like insects, fishes, reptiles. So it's spread pretty widely across the animal family tree. But at the same time, it's not sort of like all mammals have them, that some mammals do and some mammals don't. It's probably worth also pointing out at this stage that what humans kind of colloquially might refer to as the vagina is actually called the vulva. So the bits on the outside of the vulva, the vagina is the bit on the inside.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Natalie. And also, I think it's important to clarify as well at the beginning of the show that we're going to be using the terms female and male, but that is to make it easier for us to refer to animals that I think you will explain it better than me, but we will say a female animal when they receive the gametes of the other partner, and then a male animal when they are transferring the gametes to the other animal. Is that right?
Yeah, so vaginas and penises can occur in both kinds of, any kind of mammal, any kind of animal, sorry. So it's not really a sex distinction there. And we all know that biological sex is a spectrum. So yeah, as you just said, we're going to talk about things with small gametes that are being transferred as being males, and things with large gametes that receive small gametes as being females. And that's mostly just to make it a little bit less complicated when we're trying to describe things.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Natalie. Now, we're already getting questions, but before we start going into this question, I think we need to start talking about vaginas and the research. Sadly, when it comes to research of genitalia, it's penises that get more protagonisms, they get more of a spotlight. And one in particular has been on the social media, has been on newspapers as well, and that is the duck penis. So we're going to start talking about ducks, but about how ducks got you and all the scientists as well actually excited about vaginas, and it led to a really cool discovery. So can you tell us that story, Natalie?
Yeah, so I really love this story, and I would tell it to anybody I meet, really. So ducks are one of the groups of birds that have penises and vaginas. So water birds in general do. And the ducks that tend to be researched a lot in this area are the ones that have really long penises. So sometimes the penises can be longer than the ducks. So ruddy ducks, for example, have penises that are about 30 centimeters long, much bigger than the duck. The reason you don't see them sort of flapping around behind them when they're swimming in a pond is because they're usually inverted and pushed up inside the duck. So they only sort of pop up really quickly when they're actually mating. And so in these particular species that people have researched a lot, there's this interesting kind of idea of sexual evolution going on. So in these species, what happens is you have a female at the beginning of the mating season will choose a mate for that season and will only prefer to mate with them, because that's a way of ensuring that the offspring are going to be really high quality because they've chosen that mate. Then the other side of this is that you end up with a load of males who don't have mates, and so they will sort of fly around in flocks and will coercively mate with the females, whether she wants to mate or not, which can be quite distressing to watch. But in terms of natural selection, these males are competing with each other to fertilize the eggs of those females because they want to get their genes into the next generation. Best way of doing that is fertilize as many eggs as they can. And the best way of doing that is to get your semen, so your sperm, as far up the reproductive tract as possible. So as close to the eggs as you can to fertilize them. And so, of course, if you've got a longer penis, that's going to get easier. And so we think what's happened over time is that the males competing with each other have gotten longer and longer penises and transferred those genes for those longer penises to their offspring. So we think that was what was going on. And the traditional idea of what was going on with the females there was they were just kind of sitting there, kind of passively letting this happen, just complete passive actors in this whole process. And this is where things get really interesting. Somebody had the brilliant idea to go, hang on, how do we know that these males with these long penises are actually fertilizing the eggs? So they went a bit Jerry Springer on it. They paternity tested all the ducklings, and they found that actually 97% of the ducklings, they were actually related to the chosen mates of the females. And only 3% were related to these males that are kind of coercively mating females. So there's got to be something else going on there. The females are having some influence on what's happening. It's not just about penises.
So the females had some control that researchers weren't really looking into up until then. What were they doing then, Natalie? Do we know now?
Yes, so we've kind of given this away with the title of the program, but it's the amazing duck vagina, which is one of the coolest things in the natural world, I think. So the duck vagina is just all these just crazy adaptations to avoid being fertilized by a male that the female doesn't want to be fertilized by. And so you've probably seen the kind of novelty corkscrews and the horrible pictures in the press of the corkscrew penis of the male. So this is nothing special. It's just a developmental thing that makes them corkscrew. And they always corkscrew in an anti-clockwise direction. And so this is a really nice slide that's up now. And so A and B here, so the two first pictures, that's a dissected vagina and a dissected penis from these species. And these are species where the males only really mate with their preferred, with the female. So there's only sort of one male to one female kind of going on. And so they don't have this competition between males. And so you can see the penises there, which are the sort of the bits that are starred, they're actually not very big at all, because they don't have this competition between males to try and fertilize females. But in C and D, these are two species where you do have this competition. And so you can see that in that picture that those penises are much longer, they're corkscrewing. And then next to those, you can see the incredible duck vagina. So the males ones here are corkscrewing in anti-clockwise direction. The females always corkscrew in a clockwise direction, so that when the male's penis tries to get in, it kind of gets hit and stuck on the walls. It can't get where it's going. You can also see a little bit there that there are also these blind pockets and alleyways. So the penis could go into the wrong one and deposit sperm in the wrong place. It's just a massive maze that the penis has to get through in order to actually fertilize the eggs. And so we know this is hugely, hugely successful if it's only 3% of the sperm is actually getting through and actually fathering any ducklings.
So the female definitely had a huge amount of control there, even though internally at least, even though externally didn't have it. But then, Natalie, how does reproduction actually happens? How does the male that the female has actually, the female actually wants to mate with, manages to get his sperm to the right place?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question, because if there's this massive kind of Fort Knox-like structure, how are they getting in? And we think what happens is the female just relaxes the muscles, so that rather than it being this big maze, it's just a relaxed kind of tube, which allows her preferred mate to actually get their penis right up to the end of the reproductive tract and therefore be able to fertilize the eggs.
There you go. That's amazing. We're going to keep talking about this variety in vaginas in the natural world. But Natalie, we got a few cool questions coming from an audience, and also a comment. Ellie was saying the duck penises are terrifying to look at, honestly, and I hope that we didn't disappoint her with that slide. But we had some good questions as well coming from our audience. Rosie was asking, what types of mammals have a cloaca, and do they still give birth to the live young? Do we know? Is it a bit more complicated than just saying this and this and this?
Yeah, it's a little more complicated than me just listing stuff off, and it would also I think probably be some mammals that you might not have heard of. So the first one I always think of is temrex, which live in Madagascar. This is because I've had to sex them before, and it's quite difficult to do when it's just a cloaca. In the same way of sort of sex, if you've ever seen videos of people trying to sex chicks in factories, that's it's a similar situation to that. So a lot of small mammals will have a cloaca, but yeah, they still give birth to live young through the cloaca. And you also have cloaca in the things that lay eggs as well. So they will also produce eggs through that opening.
Mm-hmm. I suppose, Natalie, this is something that we were discussing before, that when centuries ago somebody decided to call something the vagina, obviously now we try to fit everything into that, but morphology is more complex than that. So in this show, we're using the description that we said at the beginning, the internal part, between the uterus and the outside, and that's it. But there's so much variety in morphology that it's really, really difficult to just say, you do have it, you don't have it.
Yeah, and I mean, we're talking about reproductive organs, which is why we can include things like insects in here, which obviously don't have uterus, but they do have, if they have internal reproductive organs, then again, we can refer to that as a vagina.
Brilliant. Now, questions coming in, and I'm going to encourage people to do send their questions as well. And as I said before, we will try to get through as many as possible. But John T on Facebook, they were asking, did penises evolve from vaginas or separately? Is there a short answer to that? Natalie, it's really complex. This is not the one thing evolved from the other or the other from one, is it?
I mean, I guess one of the things that I think we're guilty of as humans a lot is thinking of all life as being like us, but actually we're the exceptions. And so most things are hermaphroditic. So most things have both male and female. And so It's not so much that one evolved from the other, in that when things started trying to partition reproduction into two different sort of strategies, then there would have been co-evolution, what we call co-evolution. So as the vagina was becoming a particular shape, then the penis will become a particular shape to match that. And this is really well researched in insects, for example, where you have these quite beautiful kind of matching patterns of what happens in the two different kinds of genitalia. And so, yeah, so it's more co-evolution rather than one evolving from the other. Hopefully that answers the question.
I think that was really clear. Thank you so much, Natalie. Now let's start talking a little bit about, let's move on from the ducks and have a look at all the vaginas in the natural world. We've been looking at this specific tactic of having the corkscrew vaginas and the long penises, but have we seen anything similar in other animals in the natural world?
Yeah, so I mean, sticking with mammals, because they're kind of my speciality, marine mammals have been researched quite extensively in this area fairly recently. And so there's been some studies looking at types of dolphin and porpoise. So in this picture up in the top right-hand corner, that's a bottlenose dolphin. So that's, Flipper, the one that we're all familiar with. And then the one in the bottom left-hand corner, that one's a common dolphin. So we get those around the coast of the UK quite regularly. And then the common porpoise, which again, we get off the coast, and the grey seal. So we see most of these off the coast of the UK. But these, again, like the duck slide example, have different kinds of mating systems, and therefore different vaginas and penis kind of combinations. So down the bottom here, the seal and the common dolphin, they do not have coercive male mating. So they just have, one male, one female setups over the mating period. And you can see in those, you've got a much simpler, and I think the next slide probably shows this a little bit better, but the other two species, the harbour porpoise, so these are the two at the top here, the dolphin, the bottlenose dolphin on the left and the harbour porpoise on the right, they have much more complex vaginal shapes in a very similar way to the duck vagina. And so the red here is a scan of, they basically took some dead animals that found on the beach and artificially inflated the penises, and then took some molds of the vaginas to see how well they fit together. And then these top two species, so the bottlenose dolphins and the harbour porpoises, where they have a lot of situations where the males will kind of force themselves on the females. It looks like the females have a similar strategy to the ducks. So they have twists and turns, they have lots of folds, and actually you can see sort of the pointy end of the penis in these two animals. It's going to find it really hard to find the end of the reproductive canal to try and fertilize the individual, unless that female is sort of twisted in a particular direction and is really allowing them to fertilize her. Whereas in the bottom two pictures, you don't have this competition, you don't have this conflict between males and females, and so it's much easier for the penis to find the end of the reproductive canal without kind of all this kind of acrobatics.
That's amazing. So again, females having that control over who they end up reproducing with and not, which maybe wasn't that expected in the past. Now, Natalie, let's move a little bit towards other kinds of diversity with vaginas. We did get some questions about spotted hyenas. We're going to talk about them in a minute, but I think we should talk about your favorite story, which is kangaroos.
Oh yeah, so I have so many. There's so many amazing examples of diversity in vaginas, both within and between species. So marsupials, so all marsupials, all things that have pouches, including kangaroos, which is the picture here, have 3 vaginas. It's like one wasn't enough. So they have 2 vaginas going up the sides. And these head towards 2 uteruses, so they can have 2 pregnancies at once. And this is where the sperm will come in and up. And then they have 1 canal down the middle, and that's where the joeys come out from. So 2 in and 1 out vagina, which is pretty cool. And the males have 2-pronged penises as well. We're not 100% sure whether they're using one, then using the other, or using them both at the same time, but I'll let you use your imagination.
More space for research as well over there. That's amazing. And again, we got a story, somebody asking, somebody was asking from YouTube, they were asking, what's the story with female hyenas. So yeah, well, hyenas, spotted hyenas in particular, they have quite an interesting and unique set of genitalia that change throughout their lifetime, don't they? So can we talk a little bit about spotted hyenas, which are the ones that have this variety?
Yeah, so again, this is a question that people always ask. And so we're talking spotted hyenas. So there's a couple of different species of hyena. This is just the spotted ones, but those are the ones you see most commonly in videos of Africa and also in The Lion King, for example. And so this is a slightly different situation to what we've talked about with the ducks and the dolphins and stuff. But essentially, the vagina of the female hyena actually sort of comes out of the body, so from the reproductive organs, but it doesn't actually have an exit to the outside. The end of the vagina has actually been fused and forms what looks like a scrotum that you would see in a male. And instead, the opening actually goes out through the clitoris, and the clitoris is actually expanded into a kind of penis-like structure. It's not an actual penis because it isn't used to transfer gametes into another individual, but it does look very, very much like the male penis. So you can see the differences on this slide in A and B, but I mean, in the field, if you're looking at them, it's really, really difficult to tell the difference. And so all mating and also birth has to go through that very small opening in the clitoris, which obviously makes things very difficult at both of those periods. So although they don't exactly change through the lifetime, I suspect what the person who's asking the question is thinking of is that after a hyena has given birth through that, I'm sure you can imagine that it maybe doesn't quite look the same because big hyena baby, tiny hole. So yeah, you can generally tell the females that have given birth.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. They also have problems when they are mating as well with the males. They have to do it, and that gives them more control to the females as well, isn't it? Like that, mostly.
Yeah. So the females, we think part of this, the reason this has occurred is that female hyenas seem to have very high levels of testosterone. They tend to be the dominant members of some groups, and so we think that's why this has happened. So there's a lot of it has to be a very slow and kind of careful process of mating, and the female has to be completely on board with it because it takes quite a while to kind of fold back the layers in order to allow the male to actually get his penis inside that small opening.
That's brilliant. Now, Natalie, we had another question coming from our audience. Race again was asking, what about platypus and echidna, since they are strange mammals? Do they have cloacas or vaginas? I think you mentioned that. I think all the ones that lay eggs.
Yes, I think they have cloacas still. Mm-hmm. So the big stuff that's been around for longer is often more likely to have a cloaca. But then having said that, marsupials been around for a very, very long time, and they've got the 3 vagina set up.
Brilliant. Now, Natalie, we're getting to the end of the show. Only a few minutes left. I'm going to encourage people to ask more questions to see how many we can fit in. But it seems that still, as we said before, penises get more protagonism. We still know quite little about vaginas. There are loads of research that's coming out now rather than years ago. And surely there are more of these amazing adaptations in the natural world. Why is there so little research or knowledge about vaginas?
So I think there's a twofold answer here. I think answer part one is the patriarchy, which is always the thing that pops up when we have these conversations. So a lot of research has been kind of restricted by these sort of Victorian attitudes towards sexuality in women and in female animals. So this idea that female animals should be passive, they shouldn't really be involved in reproduction. Also that penises are really cool and exciting, and that vaginas would be very boring and they would just tubes. So why would you bother looking at them? And so the kinds of people who were doing the science had these sorts of ideas without perhaps even necessarily realizing. And so research is really focused on penises. And then the other thing is just it's much harder to study something that's inside the body than something that's outside.
Absolutely. So I suppose it's also like rooted in old attitudes and old ideas as well, of as you said, all perceptions that then have guided the forward research. But why is it more complicated then to study vaginas? Why is it more difficult putting that aside? Is it because they are internal, Natalie?
Yeah, essentially it's just because they're internal. So the ways that we can study them, we could use medical scanners. We can, if we've got dead animals, which of course is always a restriction, it's more difficult to get hold of samples then. You can dissect things, but sometimes, particularly things like insects, things might be very delicate, so hard to dissect stuff out. So we can use things like CT scanning, which can help. So we can sort of look at those sorts of things. We can use molds, so a lot of that cetacean stuff was using molds and using sort of dissections and things like that. But it is going to be much harder. And also, you've got to convince perhaps a museum curator that they're going to let you cut open their specimen rather than just looking at something that's already external.
That's absolutely right. But it's still, there is more research coming up now, as the one that we talked about the ducks, about the cetaceans as well, the dolphins and porpoises. Are there any more studies going on about this, about genitalia and the female genitalia as well, or vaginas in this case?
Yeah, totally. I mean, there's loads and loads of stuff. And I think what's really good is that now there's more more studies looking at the evolution of both together, which makes way more sense. But loads of research in insects and so flies and dung beetles, which seem to have more diverse internal genitalia than the males have external genitalia, so good for them. Stuff on fish vaginas changing in response to sort of pollutants and things like that. Just loads and loads of diversity. So if you're interested in this, I would definitely recommend popping to the Vagina Museum in Camden Town and finding out a bit more about the sort of human vaginal diversity as well, because there's huge amounts of diversity, which is all completely normal, but we don't really talk about it very often.
Absolutely. Now, Natalie, we had a couple of questions that I think is fair enough to specify about them, but Barbara was asking to do a webinar about how sex is a spectrum. They were suggesting that, and then Sue was asking, what's the issue with using names assigned to two biological sexes? It's not about the names, and it's about our perception a little bit and what we know now, isn't it, Natalie? In some way, as we said before, biological sex is a spectrum, and we want to be as inclusive as possible with everyone.
Yeah, I think as humans, we sort of have had this habit of wanting to put everything into boxes and to categorize things. But the more that we do research on this, the more we realize those boxes don't really mean anything. It does make things trickier, obviously, to try and explain concisely. But at the same time, it's more inclusive, and it's actually expressing the diversity of the natural world much better, which I think is really important.
Mm-hmm. And I think we mentioned it before, but, hundreds of years ago, in the Victorian times, or more patriarchal researchers would have put terms on things that, as we know more and as we learn more about the natural world, we realize is, as you said, is not everything in one box or another. There's a lot of variety in morphology, in evolution, in how we understand these things. So it's important to highlight that new understanding of all this, of the natural world in general.
Oh, exactly. I mean, this whole thing has been a great example that we thought that ducks were just sitting there, but actually they've got this amazing arms race going on inside, and you'll never go to the park and look at them in the same way again.
Exactly. We're really, really close to the end of the show, Natalie, but I think this leads quite nicely into why it's important to study vaginas and reproductive organs as well.
I just think we're missing half the story, or at least half the story, if we're only looking at penises. And so as an evolutionary biologist, that concerns me, because natural selection is all about getting genes into the next generation. To do that, reproduction needs to happen. It needs to be successful. So if we're only looking at half of that, then we're missing half of the story of evolution and half of the story of diversity of life on Earth.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Natalie. Thank you so much for that. But sadly, we've reached the end of the show. That was amazing. That was fascinating. I'm so glad that we could sit down here and have a lovely chat. And what I'm hoping is that we can get you over again in the future and chat about this half of science that we don't chat about that much. So I'm going to say goodbye to you now, Natalie, but hopefully see you in the future. Thank you so much, Natalie. Bye-bye. Brilliant. And thank you as well so much to you, our audience, for joining us today, watching and sending us your excellent questions. Remember that if you can support the museum without donation, we really, really appreciate it. And you can do that by clicking on the button that is by the YouTube chat or going directly to our website, and we'll put a link to that. But it's been fantastic to have you there and get your questions. And hopefully as well see you in more shows. Just remember, the Nature Live Online happens every Tuesday at 1 p.m. UK time, and we have so much more exciting content ready for you. Next week, my colleague Khalil Thurley, we will be chatting with wildlife photographer Ripan Biswas about telling the stories of the animals that are often overlooked in photography. Now, if you want to know more, do keep an eye on our social media, and that way you will be able to keep up to date with Nature Live Online, but also all the programs that we have at the museum. You can check our website, you can check our YouTube channel as well to watch past events. But that's all the time I have with you today, for you today. I'm going to say thank you so much for tuning in and see you next time. Bye-bye.